What is good? I'm back, and so are you, and you know what that means. Animorphs. If you're new here, my name is Marcello. I talk about media, mostly books, mostly 90s middle grade books, pretty exclusively Animorphs books, although I do have plans to diversify eventually. In this series of videos, I am recapping and reviewing the entire Animorphs series and then using a scientific ranking system that I have created myself to determine which book is objectively the best one. I am being facetious when I describe the method as scientific. The real goal of the series is to make me think more deeply about each book, eventually turning me into a full Animorphs scholar like so many of you in the comments section. I'm not being facetious when I say that, you guys know many things. In this video, we are talking about Animorphs 11, The Forgotten. This one. And for the third time in a row, I am going to tell you guys I love this book. It is a favorite. I did not own a copy as a kid, but I read it in the school library and I absolutely loved it. I only owned like 10 copies of Animorphs books when I was young because they cost money and I did not have a lot of that. Obviously, I've compensated for this in my adult life. There's also a stack of duplicates over there that is bigger than the actual collection. Anyway, The Forgotten is an absolutely awesome book. We get to visit the rainforest, we visit space, we travel through time. I was genuinely so excited when I realized that this book was up next. Let's talk facts before we get to the book itself, though. The Forgotten is the third book narrated by Jake, the leader, the prince of the Animorphs. The front cover quote is, "Nothing is as it seems," and the inside cover quote is, "Here, kitty, kitty." I think we are running out of good things to put on the covers of this book because "Nothing is as it seems" could be on any Animorphs cover. It's a pretty generic one. Anyway, we're not going to complain about it. Here is a good piece of trivia, courtesy of Anibase. Thank you guys. Ka says that when she reached this book, she had like a crisis of confidence or something, and apparently she thought that this book was like way too weird and out there and was the product of her having run out of ideas, thinking that this would certainly spell the end of the Animorphs series in the near future. We are all very fortunate that she was incorrect, and she went on to continue to churn out solid bangers for years to come. That is enough of that. Let's get down to business. The book opens up with the Yeerk invasion elevator pitch that we all know and love. Nothing new here. The first scene shows Jake in a square dancing class at school with Rachel when Cassie shows up and tells him that Tobias wants to see them after school. Jake continues to dance, wondering what Tobias could possibly want, when suddenly he finds himself swinging through a dense green forest before being snapped back into his regular body. He shakes it off because that is what happens in every single work of fiction when someone has like a clearly supernatural or, super scientific or whatever experience. They just like shake it off and pretend nothing happened. It's like mandatory if you're writing a work of fiction where there are like this type of flashbacks or flash forwards. Lateral flashes are what these really are. Anyway, Jake, in spite of his brushing it off, does tell the reader that he knows that what just happened was not a hallucination and that it was real, in whatever capacity it could be real, I guess. Later, Jake and Marco are walking together, and Jake tells the reader about the night that they found Elfangor's fighter and the ensuing events. He says that he's seen and done things that he wishes that he couldn't remember, and this is one of the first times that we are directly informed of the traumatic effects that the war is starting to have on our little group of child warriors. We witness a lot of these traumatic events, and we see what happens to the Animorphs after each given thing, but I think this is the first time that in like the introductory debrief, they say specifically, we are all deeply traumatized by our own actions. The violence and carnage has really been ratcheting up lately, and I think that this makes sense. Anyway, they walk, and Tobias swoops out of the sky and tells them to hurry up and morph birds and meet him up in the sky. Once the group does so, Tobias informs them that they are headed to Safeway, where they are having a sale on high-ranking controllers, apparently. They meet up with the rest of the Animorphs in the air, and upon arrival at Safeway, they see deep gouges in the parking lot and a broken wall in the front of the store. From the air, it's apparent that some sort of ship has crash-landed in the parking lot and then skidded into the store, and this is made even more conspicuous by the fact that Chapman seems to be in charge of the repair effort. As we know, Chapman is a very high-ranking controller. The group begins to discuss a plan when Jake has another one of his weird flashes of consciousness. This time he finds himself staring into the face of some kind of big cat before again snapping back to the reality that he knows. Everyone asks him what's going on, but he once again brushes them off and tells them that they should go in for a closer look at the crash site later that night when there are fewer people around. The Animorphs decide that they will meet that night at the motel across the street from the Safeway. They will morph fly over 4 lanes of busy traffic using the scent of all the food and probably rotting food in the dumpsters by the grocery store as a navigational beacon. Tobias insists upon coming, even though he cannot morph because he likes to be a part of things. At home before the mission, Jake's dad asks him if he's excited for the big fight that they've ordered on pay-per-view. Remember those days? I'm sure they You can still buy things on pay-per-view, actually. Jake facepalms because he's completely forgotten about this fight when scheduling the mission, but he knows that he won't be able to bail out without arousing undue suspicion, so he just kind of hopes that the fight will go quickly. As they watch the fight, Jake notices that Tom also seems very anxious to leave, inferring that he probably has some Yerk business to attend to, maybe even the same business that Jake has to attend to. Again, reading this, I found myself thinking that this would be a great episode for an Animorphs revival TV show. A scene with Jake and Tom both pretending to be excited about this fight, but both really anxious to get away to their respective duties on opposite sides of the same intergalactic war would be some very cool television. The fight ends, and as Jake gets ready to leave, he has yet another weird consciousness flash, this time finding himself standing in a circle in the forest with the rest of the Animorphs, listening to Marco rant about typical Marco things. What are we doing here? This is so crazy. You know, how did I get here? Again, this only lasts for a few seconds, and Jake is soon back in his body, listening to his dad tell him to be careful biking to Marco's, where Jake has said he wants to bring the tape of the fight in some good quick thinking. Jake arrives at the motel late because of his domestic duties, and again, he doesn't mention his weird little visions to the rest of the crew. The group prepares to morph, and Jake notices a moment where it seems like they are waiting for him to signal to get going. He looks at his watch, and he notes the time for some reason. It's 8:19, and asks aloud if they should go through with their mission before giving the nod. Something poignant has just happened, and Jake doesn't really understand why, but this feels like an important moment. The group carries on, they morph flies, and they embark on the mission. It starts to rain, providing an additional element of danger to this mission as they make their way across the 4 lanes of traffic, and Jake is hit by a raindrop, which causes him to almost get hit by a car, before yet another flash overtakes him, giving him another few seconds in the jungle. He comes back to reality, and the car misses him by a millimeter, and the gang makes their way across the road without further incident. They enter the store, and they eavesdrop on a group of controllers, which includes Chapman and Tom, who are huddled around what seems to be a new experimental bug fighter prototype. Cassie overhears Chapman say that they have to get it out of there in 3 hours, or Visser Three will show up and murder them all. Jake jokingly suggests that they should steal it and go land on the White House lawn in order to blow the lid right off this secret invasion for good, and the group winds up taking this suggestion seriously, as Axe is very capable of driving a primitive Yerk ship, of course, because he's so sophisticated as an Andalite and he has more fingers than people at least, and the Animorphs come up with a plan. In fly form, the group sneaks into the bug fighter while Tobias flies into the store, causing the controllers to all attack him, assuming that he is an Andalite bandit. This includes the controllers who are currently inside the bug fighter, who quickly evacuate in order to aid the effort in getting this hawk out of the sky. This leaves the Animorphs in fly morph alone in the bug fighter. Tobias, incidentally, has some trouble escaping, and he also winds up flying into the bug fighter, while Axe demorphs and soon gets them the hell out of there. A few minutes later, the Animorphs are all inside the bug fighter, flying towards the White House. Jake and Marco argue over who gets to man the weapons, which they have some fun firing into the empty night sky, before Axe informs them that the bug fighter's cloaking field does not appear to be working, and that they've been picked up by human radar. Soon they're greeted by 2 military jets, which they outrun with ease, shooting up into space before running right into Visser Three's blade ship. With the knowledge that they can neither outrun nor outfight the blade ship, they take a Hail Mary shot with the bug fighter's Dracon beams. So the blade ship fires on them at the exact same time, and the Dracon beams hit each other in midair. As the beams hit each other, it causes some kind of crazy, weird, scientific, magical reaction that causes the blade ship to repeat all of the most recent spells that it's done in, like, reverse order. Wait a minute. It causes a huge flash of light before the bug fighter goes spinning out of control towards Earth, and I can't believe that J.K. Rowling completely stole this scene for Goblet of Fire. As the bug fighter careens out of control, Cassie notices that it is now daylight in the Western Hemisphere, which makes no sense because it was night when they left, but the group has bigger concerns at the moment. Axe is able to slow the ship down a bit, and as the Animorphs brace for impact, Jake has a brief flash of square dancing with Rachel. He has just enough time to say WTF to himself before the bug fighter crashes into the ground. Jake wakes up in a forest to a cacophony of nature noises. He immediately knows that this is the place that he's been seeing in his visions. I won't do it justice here, but I would like to point out that the description of the rainforest in this book is great. K.A. really drives home how lush, verdant, and overwhelmingly full of both life and danger it is, and it's wonderful to read. Jake goes looking for the rest of the group, and eventually he finds Tobias, who leads him to the rest of the Animorphs, who are all fine, for now. They're gathered around the bug fighter wreckage, wondering where they are. Cassie infers that they are in a rainforest, probably the Amazon, but that it's not where they are that they should be asking. And Jake dutifully asks what she means, and she points out again that as they fell from the sky, she noticed that it was now daylight in parts of the planet where it should still have been night. At this point, Axe trots up and lets Jake know that it appears when the two Dracon beams intersected, they created something called a Sario Rip, a hole in space-time, which they were then drawn through. Jake asks if they are in the past or the future, and Axe says yes. For some reason, and maybe it started here, I don't really know, it always makes me laugh when someone offers a binary choice, like, is it this or this? And then the person says yes. Because, like, you could interpret, are we in the past or the future? Like, yes, we are in the past or the future. Axe states that it is 1:22 p.m., but he doesn't know what day or year it is. Jake presses him for more information about the Sario Rip, and we learn that Axe was not the best student, and he was too busy ogling some Andalite female during Sario Rip Day in school to pay attention. The gang is discussing the fact that Visser Three and his crew may also have been sucked into the Sario Rip, which would mean that they have more than just Earth predators to worry about, when someone throws a spear at them through the trees. Tobias sees the spear throwers running away, and he lets the gang know that they appear to be 3 kids, and also that there are about 20 Hork-Bajir tearing through the forest and heading in their direction. Jake asks Axe if there's anything he can take from the bug fighter that will prevent the Yeerks from flying away with it, and Axe says that there is. The Hork-Bajir are dangerously close, but Jake orders Axe to retrieve whatever this thing is while the rest of the group escapes. They leave Axe to his sabotage and run into the trees. Jake's books are usually very plotty, and this one is no exception. There are a few that are a bit more emotionally heavy and focus on the impact of his leadership on his own psyche, and later the ever-complex Tom issue, as well as Jake's relationship with Cassie and the way that those two things interact with one another in terrible ways that make us all feel very sad for the characters that we love so much. Mostly, Jake's books are just a ton of action with Jake kind of just being the leader, which makes sense when you think about it, because as the leader, Jake's character development is pretty tied to how successful he is at directing the counter-invasion. Big, consequential decisions often fall at his feet, and as a result, his books are often full of fun, consequential action. This tends to leave some of the books a little light on character moments, although KA still certainly finds time for them. This is one of those character moments. It's a brief moment, and we kind of fly right by it in the midst of all of this action, but Jake has made a decision here which may result in Axe's death, while being rational enough to mitigate risk by having the rest of the Animorphs flee. I just wanted to take a second to appreciate that, as well as to apologize for what I worry may be a lack of deep analysis in this video, due to the plot just being so action-packed. You guys know I read a script. This is a sincere comment. I wind up taking this back because KA finds a wonderful way to continue to pack character moments in to a very action-packed book. And I really have to commend the fact that she's able to make Jake's books so very plot-oriented while still finding ways to continue to develop his character. But we'll get to that when the time comes. So the group fights their way through the brush, assaulted by bugs all the while, before Tobias alerts them that Axe has been sighted by the Hork-Bajir. He's kind of shitty about it, saying, "You happy now, Jake?" like yelling at him. Tobias has never been the most rational. He's very prone to emotional reasoning, and he's also super close to Axe, so I guess we can forgive him this time, but it is still not the best way to act. Not super productive. Jake instructs the rest of the group to hang back as backup while he and Rachel morph to help Axe. Rachel morphs Grizzly Bear, which is not super well adapted to the rainforest, and Jake morphs Tiger, which is perfectly suited to their new environment. Jake feels angry as he races through the forest, angry at Tobias for being shitty with him, angry at Rachel's impulsivity, but mostly he is angry at himself, and angry at all of the mistakes that he perceives that he has made so far in this whole mission and rainforest Sario Rip situation. He realizes that Grizzly Rachel is having trouble keeping up with him, and he's faced with another decision: stay with Rachel or race ahead to find Axe. Tobias makes the decision for him by directing him towards the Hork-Bajir warriors, where Jake gets to let out some of his anger on some innocent Hork-Bajir host bodies before being bit by a venomous snake. He's able to demorph before the poison overtakes him, and now we know that you can demorph away from poison, which is good knowledge. And Tobias urges him to go and help Rachel. Jake arrives at Rachel's side to find 3 dead Hork-Bajir warriors, and Rachel's unconscious grizzly bear body being devoured alive by millions of ants. Doing some quick thinking, Jake uses some bloody grizzly bear fur to draw a second ant colony out and towards Rachel's body, where the ants start fighting each other, giving Rachel enough time to regain consciousness and demorph. Unfortunately, she is still covered in ants, so she follows Jake into a stream where the ants are replaced by vicious piranhas who try to eat them. Jake and Rachel manage to escape to a riverbank while the rest of the group waits as Rachel laments the various conservation efforts in place to save the Amazon. I do this scene zero justice in this recap, and I'm not really trying to. You should go read the book if you like, if you've forgotten how visceral the scene is. It's a really good book. All I'll say is that this whole little sequence of events was burned into my brain as a kid. Truly brutal stuff, and there aren't even any Yeerks involved. This is just plain old Earth nature, and it is nightmare fodder. As they recover from their ordeal, Axe shows up in Monkey Morph. He shows Jake that he has done as Jake ordered, taking a critical piece of the Bug Fighter with him as he escaped. It's this weird yellow floppy disk that apparently is the Bug Fighter computer core. In the TV show, there's a whole little subplot about a little, floppy disk that houses a piece of technology that the Yeerks are after, and I feel like they lifted it from this book. The TV series basically just took plot elements from a bunch of different books, put them together in nonsensical order, and made sure that they were disjointed and bad, and then slap the Animorphs logo on it. That's a story for another video, though. Marco states that it would probably be a good idea to acquire some local morphs, as the Yeerks are now out looking for them in force, and Axe leads them to the monkeys. At this point, Marco goes off on the same rant that Jake witnessed in his vision earlier in the book, and Jake finishes Marco's sentence for him, drawing stares from the group that prompt him to finally confess that he's been having these visions. Axe states that what is happening is probably due to two simultaneous states of consciousness intersecting outside of space-time. Basically, Jake was having flashes of what was happening to him concurrently in the rainforest. That means that they've only traveled back in time by about a day, since that's how long Jake has been witnessing the flashbacks. However, since there are definitely not supposed to be two sets of Animorphs existing in the same timeline, this is not a good thing. It means that once they get back to the time that the rip occurred, they will all die. Probably. Axe wasn't really paying attention in school on Sario Rip Day, you see. If this is true, it means that they will have about 6 hours to figure out how to get back to their original timeline. Axe starts to say something, but seems to opt against it, and Jake does not press him. So they acquire the monkeys, and soon find themselves swinging through the trees, having a blast. They notice some Hork-Bajir marching through the forest, and they decide to follow them. Their reasoning at this point is that Visser Three probably knows about the Sario Rip, and this is their best bet at getting back to the future. They can just hitch a ride on the blade ship. As they tail the controllers, they notice that the controllers are shooting all suspicious-looking animals on sight. More casualties of the war. Good thing that this is not a Cassie book, or we would never hear the end of it. The Animorphs wind up acting a little sus, which leads the controllers to decide to shoot every monkey that they see. Jake notes that while he doesn't care that much about nature, even he is bothered by all of this unnecessary destruction. Fortunately, the rampage is cut short by Visser Three dropping out of the sky as some kind of giant boa constrictor before dramatically demorphing in front of his troops. He yells at the controllers for having such itchy trigger fingers, stating that they may have destroyed the Bug Fighter, or worse, him. Jake asks Axe why the Yeerks would need the Bug Fighter, and Axe says that they may be trying to recreate the intersection of the two Dracon beams in order to close the Sario Rip. With growing trepidation, Jake realizes that by making Axe take that little disc thing, he has now made a covert escape impossible. No one else seems to put this together, however, and Axe continues to reassure the group that the Yeerks will never be able to fly the Bug Fighter, pleased that he's succeeded in following Jake's orders without being able to see their greater implication. That's kind of typical of Axe though, isn't it? Jake wishes that someone would realize and call him out on it, but it doesn't happen. They all demorph and reunite with Tobias when they are ambushed by some locals. There are about 12 of them, all holding poison spears, which they've pointed at the Animorphs. They start to speak to the Animorphs, and Marco, whose grandmother only spoke Spanish, realizes that they're speaking some form of Spanish or maybe Portuguese, and that they're referring to Jake as Monkey Spirit. The Animorphs and the locals struggle through some basic communication before determining that they are all on the same side, and that they are all not fans of the controllers who have been destroying the rainforest. The locals tell the Animorphs that they are going to kill the devils who are destroying the forest before disappearing into the trees once more. At this point, it starts to rain, and the gang decides to take a break. Cassie takes this opportunity to sit next to Jake and ask him what's going on, telling him that she can tell that he's angry, and that she thinks he's probably mad at himself. Always intuitive Cassie. She commends Jake for how he liaised with the leader of the locals, whose name is Polo, and tells Jake that he's making the best decisions he can in the moments he has to make them. Jake falls asleep at this point. Cassie is right, by the way, and this kind of goes back to the theme of The Secret. You can't get everything right all the time. You can't be perfect. You can't see or understand everything. You can only do your best in each individual instance. I love that she's remembered this theme of that book and is now imparting it onto the other Animorphs to help them get through their character struggles in their books. So Jake wakes up and he's staring into the face of a jaguar, his flashback from earlier. Jake acquires the jaguar, causing it to go into a trance, and as he does so, he wakes up the rest of the Animorphs, telling them to acquire the jaguar one at a time and then run. Axe goes last since he is the fastest boy. A few minutes later, they're all safe, and with 2 hours left, they decide to go and try to find the Blade ship. They morph Jaguar to do so, which they find quite enjoyable, and Tobias notices a lot of light off in the distance, which the group decides to move towards. As they make their way through the forest, we get a whole chapter that is completely dedicated to how diverse and awesome the rainforest is. You really lose yourself in the world building in this book. It is truly excellent. As the group appreciates nature's splendor, Cassie urges them onward. This seems uncharacteristic of her to Jake, who expects Cassie to enjoy this nature walk, but she tells him that she is more focused on how if they don't succeed in their fight against the Yeerks, there will be no more rainforest or anything else for that matter. I appreciate the brief glimpse into Cassie's mind that we've gotten in this book. It's appropriate given the setting and everything, and I often find myself wondering about her perspective when reading other characters' books. So the group approaches the lights, and Tobias lets them know that it is indeed the Blade ship, as well as the Bug Fighter, which the controllers appear to have dragged over. This gives Jake pause, but he's unable to put a finger on why, so he moves on. The group approaches the site, noticing Visser Three through the window of the Blade ship. They deliberate on how best to achieve their goal, with time running out, and Jake starts to panic, yelling that he has no plan, he has no answer to get them out of this situation. Cassie wonders aloud at this point why Jake was the only one who had the rainforest visions, which causes Jake to finally ask Axe what he's been keeping from them. Typical Axe once more, not giving everyone all the information that they need. After some pressure, Axe says that it's possible that Jake is the only real person there. The rest of them may be just a memory. More accurately, they may be an echo of an erased timeline, meaning that it's probable that Jake is the only one who escapes from all of this, and implying that there is another way to reverse the effects of the Sario Rip. As they continue to discuss this new development, Tobias notices that Visser Three's image in the Blade ship window shimmers, and that it is probably a hologram. At that moment, Visser Three's voice echoes through their heads. Turns out this whole setup was one big old trap, and now the Animorphs are in the Visser's clutches. The Animorphs try to make a break for it, but they're snatched up by a bunch of what they initially thought were vines, but which turn out to be the limbs of a Lurdathak, which Axe explains is a creature from the Hork-Bajir homeworld that Visser Three has morphed. Axe's explanation is cut short as he is engulfed by the vines. Carnage ensues, with the Animorphs each in turn falling victim to this new horror as Tobias narrates from above, so Jake knows exactly what's going on and who is dying. Visser Three swallows the Animorphs, leaving only Jake and Tobias, but Tobias attempts to attack him in Hawkmorph in an exercise in abject futility, so he gets swallowed and soon joins his friends in Visser Three's caustic stomach. All hope is nearly lost when Polo and the locals show up with spears and they throw the scene into fresh chaos. Jake demorphs into the fray and morphs Monkey, using Visser Three's vine arms like branches and racing towards the Lurdathak's head, carrying one of the poison spears of the local warriors. Jake manages to drive the spear right into Visser Three's head before a tentacle whips towards him, wraps around his neck, and Jake finds himself once again in the motel across the street from the Safeway. That poignant moment that Jake had earlier while the group was waiting for him to give the go-ahead to start their mission happens again, but this time, instead of saying, let's go do it, Jake says they're gonna let this one go, and he dismisses them. A few days later, Jake talks to Axe and tells him everything. Axe is amazed and theorizes that what probably happened was that Jake died, causing his consciousness to snap back to the other timeline, basically making it so that none of the events of the rainforest ever happened. Jake reflects on how many poor decisions he made, and how they're all lucky that it ended the way that it did, but Axe says that Elfangor used to tell him it's a leader's job to be lucky. The end. So my one question after reading this book for the 50th time, why was Jake the only one to have these visions and remember the events of the rainforest? The running theory was that this is because they recreated the Sario Rip, but only Jake survived, but if he only snapped back because he died, that's not really survival, and the rest of them died too? Is it because he died last of all of the Animorphs? I'm a little confused by this point, but honestly, time travel in fiction is basically just asking for trouble, usually in the form of weird little technicalities like this one, so I'm gonna forgive it. I also will forgive it because I love this book, but I wonder if Visser Three remembers the events of the Sario Rip. Anyway, I know, I said that we would be light on analysis, but I really underestimated Kae's devotion to character development and how thoroughly she incorporates the characters' respective arcs into the greater plots of the novels that they narrate. In this case, we get to witness Jake living through one of his worst fears, causing the death of his friends through his decisions as leader. The events of this book hinge on Jake's decisions, and whether you think he chose right or wrong at any given moment, he did have to witness all of his friends die. Sure, he got a weird get-out-of-jail-free card in the end, but at that moment, he certainly did not know that would be the case. He had to live through knowing that his friends died because of his decisions. And now, of all of them, he's the only one who has to live with that memory. This is an excellent piece of development for Jake, who will surely view the gravity of his decisions in a whole new light going forward now that he's actually lived through the worst case scenario. The pressure of this knowledge, of this experience, coupled with the continuing need for Jake to play the role of leader would be enough to crush a lot of people, but Jake is made of stronger stuff than that. I like to ask, what does the title mean? And in this case, I feel like I actually know. The Forgotten is obviously a reference to the events of the book, which never really happened and which were forgotten by all of the Animorphs, except for Jake. It's a bit of a misnomer, really, but it's clever, and I like it. It should be called the Remembering, but I guess that doesn't have the same ring to it. What's good? It's me. You guys know I can't edit a video without wanting to go back and add my own thoughts to it. I just realized that if Jake goes back to like this other timeline that took place like a day and a half before the events of this book, it's not really that the Animorphs like don't remember what happened. He's just in a different timeline. So like technically speaking, the Rachel and Marco and Cassie and Axe and Tobias that he is interacting with going forward are not the same group of people whose names I'm not going to repeat all again as he was interacting with for all of the books up to this point, right? Like these are he's in a new timeline now. He's in like a new dimension or some shit. That's pretty crazy. I never thought about that before. All told, the events of this book will be critical to shaping Jake into the leader that he will become, one who is not afraid to take risks or to make sacrifices, but not because he's ignorant, because he knows the potential consequences. He has lived through them, but he is brave enough and strong enough to continue to lead. I do appreciate Jake, especially right now, although I don't like him as much as Tobias or Marco, or probably Axe, or probably Cassie. I don't really know why that is. I definitely loved Jake's books, but like, he's just not as funny as Marco and not as emotional as Tobias and not as insightful as Cassie. He is the leader and he does so many important things, but just as a character, I never found him that intriguing. Now, funnily enough, when he interacts with Margot and is talking about like playing Doom and Spider-Man and shit like that, I find him much more likable. So maybe that's another point of this book, I guess. Maybe this is intentional. Jake's personality is so devoted to being the leader of the Animorphs that he's had to compromise the parts of him that are relatable and likable and typical of a teenager. Yeah, good stuff, KA. So let's talk numbers. For plot, I am giving this book a 10. I love time travel in books, even if it's usually messy in one way or another. I can't help it. I even liked the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, and that's one of the worst, silliest uses of time travel ever. For significance, I'm gonna give this book a 6. It is significant to Jake, and we'll give him points in the character section for that. It's significant in that we get more Sario Rip action in the future, but mostly the events of this book didn't really take place, so how significant can it really be to the series as a whole? Having said that, I'm giving it a 9 for character because I think this is really formative for Jake. It's like a trial run for accidentally getting all of his friends killed and dooming humanity. Good job. And for writing, we get the usual 8. The ghostwriters come in at around book 25, people. We will get there, and I will have opinions. Probably. Anyway, this leaves us with a final score of 8.35, putting this book in 5th place of the 11 that we've read, right behind The Predator. Man, this run of books is solid. That'll do it for this episode. Thank you, as always, for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. Until next time.